in western Idaho along a bend in the Salmon River. Archaeologist Lauren Davis stood over an excavation pit in 2009 that would fundamentally alter our understanding of when humans first reached the Americas. It's a site known as Cooper's Ferry to archaeologists and Nipéhe to the Nez Perce people, whose oral traditions have long identified it as an ancient village, appeared unremarkable from the surface. Local ranchers had walked across this river terrace for generations, occasionally finding odd stones in the eroding banks. But systematic excavation by Davis's team from Oregon State University would reveal something extraordinary buried in the sediment layers beneath their feet. If you're interested in how modern archaeology is rewriting human prehistory, consider subscribing so you don't miss future discoveries. The upper excavation layers yielded exactly what the team expected. Clovis's projectile points, its distinctive fluted spear tips, dated to approximately 13,000 years before present, have defined the narrative of American prehistory for nearly a century. According to the established model, Clovis people represented the first Americans' big game hunters who crossed the Bering Land Bridge during the last ice age and traveled south through an ice-free corridor that opened between massive glacial sheets covering Canada. This theory had achieved the status of settled science, repeated in textbooks and taught in universities worldwide. Then the team excavated deeper. Below the Clovis layer, the fluted projectile points disappeared entirely. The sediment composition changed, and in the dark, compacted soil beneath, the team began recovering artifacts that created an immediate chronological problem. The first significant find was a constructed hearthnot, a natural burn, but a deliberately engineered fire pit. The feature had been dug into the earth and lined with fire-cracked rocks designed to retain and distribute heat efficiently. Inside, they found charcoal from wood burned by human hands millennia ago. Surrounding this hearth were stone tools and hundreds of lithic flakes, the razor-sharp debris produced when skilled craftspeople manufacture implements from stone. The tools themselves told a different story than the Clovis layer above. These were stemmed projectile points blades with a sharp tip at one end and a carefully shaped stem at the other, designed to be hafted onto wooden shafts. Archaeologists classified this technology as the Western stemmed tradition, and it represents a fundamentally different approach to stone tool manufacture than the Clovis fluted point technology. Over subsequent excavation seasons, the team recovered 189 stone artifacts from these deeper layers, including 27 complete tools. 13 of these were stemmed projectiles, along with various scrapers, blades, and other implements. But the most significant detail wasn't just what they found, it was how they found it. Many of these tools were discovered in what archaeologists call cache pits, deliberately excavated holes where people had buried high-quality implements for safekeeping. This behavior indicates something crucial about the nature of occupation at this site. People don't cache valuable equipment in random locations. They cache it in places they know intimately, places they trust, places they intend to return to. This suggested not a temporary camp, but repeated occupation over extended periods, indicating intimate knowledge of this specific landscape. When radiocarbon dates came back from the charcoal samples, they created an immediate crisis for the established timeline. The dates ranged between 15,000 and 16,000 years before Presenta, full 3,000 years older than the Clovis culture. This date created an insurmountable geographical problem. 16,000 years ago, the ice-free corridor through Canada, the route that Clovis people supposedly used to enter the Americas, didn't exist. The Laurentide and Cordillon ice sheets were at their maximum extent, courting an impenetrable barrier of ice more than a mile thick in places, stretching from Alaska to Montana. Even if a narrow gap had temporarily opened, recent paleoenvironmental studies demonstrate it would have been a barren, muddy wasteland, completely lacking the plant and animal resources necessary to sustain human travelers. The door was locked. If people were living in Idaho 16,000 years ago, they couldn't have walked there through Canada. They must have arrived by an entirely different route. Analysis of the stone tools themselves provided the first clue to solving this mystery. The stemmed points from Cooper's Ferry were manufactured from cryptocrystalline silicate, a high-quality stone that fractures predictably like glass and produces edges sharper than surgical steel. This material doesn't occur naturally at the site. It had to be transported from specific geological deposits located miles away, demonstrating that these people were mobile, organized, and knowledgeable enough about the regional landscape to target the highest quality stone sources. But the real revelation came from comparative analysis of the manufacturing techniques. The stemmed points from Cooper's Ferry bore a striking resemblance to late Upper Paleolithic tools found in Hokkaido, Japan, dating to approximately 20,000 years ago. The technological similarities were specific and detailed. Both traditions used identical core reduction methods. Both created predetermined flake blanks using Laval wall-like techniques, and both rejected the fluted point style that would later characterize Clovis technology in favor of stemmed bases designed for different hafting methods. The technological fingerprint was unmistakable. The first Americans at Cooper's Ferry carried stoneworking traditions that originated in northeastern Asia, and since the overland route through Canada was blocked by continental ice sheets, only one migration route remained viable. They came by boat along the Pacific coast. This confirms what researchers call the Kelp Highway hypothesis, tearing the last glacial maximum while Canada was buried under ice sheets more than 2 miles thick. The Pacific coastline remained open and, crucially, extraordinarily productive. Kelp forests stretched for thousands of miles along the coast, creating one of the richest marine ecosystems on Earth, teeming with fish, seals, sea otters, shellfish, and seabirds. For a maritime culture, which the archaeological evidence increasingly suggests these groups were, this wasn't a barrier. It was a superhighway of resources. Starting around 17,000 years ago, groups began migrating south from Beringia, the now submerged landmass that connected Siberia and Alaska. They followed the abundance, establishing coastal camps and gradually pushing farther south. The Columbia River Basin, where Cooper's Ferry is located, would have been the first major access point into the continental interior. The Salmon River, rich with spawning fish every season, would have drawn these maritime people upstream repeatedly, leading them to this specific river terrace. The evidence proves they weren't just fishing. Scattered among the stone tools, the excavation team found 86 bone fragments. These weren't from deer or elk. They were tooth fragments from an extinct species of Ice Age horse known as equus. These fragments were found in direct association with the stone tools and hearths and the cultural layers, providing definitive evidence that the inhabitants of Cooper's Ferry were hunting and butchering Ice Age megafauna that disappeared at the end of the Pleistocene. DNA evidence has recently connected this archaeological picture to living populations. In 2014, geneticist S.K. Willis-Leff sequenced the genome of the Anzac child, an infant buried 12,600 years ago in Montana, with over 100 Clovis tools and covered in red ochre. Analysis revealed that approximately 80% of all present-day Native Americans from Canada to Chile are direct descendants of this child's population. The DNA showed something crucial. The Anzac child shared about 1/3 of his genome with a 24,000-year-old individual from Malta, Siberia, near Lake Baikal, with the remainder coming from ancestral East Asian populations. This meant that groups from Siberia and East Asia met and mixed before 25,000 years ago, creating a unique founding population that became isolated in Beringia for thousands of years before expanding south into the Americas. The critical link came from another ancient individual, the Spirit Caveman from Nevada, who died 10,700 years ago. He was found with Western stemmed tradition tools, the exact same technology found at Cooper's Ferry. Genetic analysis proved he was closely related to the Anzac child and, by extension, to modern Native Americans. This connects the archaeological evidence perfectly. The people who made stemmed points at Cooper's Ferry 16,000 years ago were the direct ancestors of the Clovis people who appeared 3,000 years later. Clovis didn't represent a separate migration. that replaced earlier populations. Instead, Clovis evolves from them. The western-stemmed tradition was evidence of multiple migrations. It was the technology of the founding population as they moved down the Pacific coast and pushed inland. The most remarkable aspect of Cooper's Ferry isn't a single spectacular date, it's the persistence. As the team excavated deeper layers, they found evidence of repeated occupation spanning 3,000 years, from 16,000 to 13,000 years ago. Multiple generations returned to this exact location, used the same river terrace, hunted the same species, and cached tools in the same cultural pits. The principle of superposition, a fundamental concept in geology, tells us that in undisturbed sedimentary layers, the oldest material is always at the bottom. At Cooper's Ferry, the deepest cultural deposits date to approximately 16,000 years ago. Since the team found fully formed hearths, sophisticated tools, processed animal remains at that level, human activity almost certainly began even earlier. Some archaeologists involved in the excavation believe initial settlement could approach 17,000 years ago. Cooper's Ferry fundamentally changes the narrative of how humans first reached the Americas. The first Americans were big game hunters who waited patiently for ice sheets to melt before trudging through a narrow corridor between glaciers into an empty continent. There were sophisticated maritime peoples who navigated down the Pacific coast using watercraft, carrying Asian technologies with them, and pushing up river systems deep into the continental interior millennia before conventional theories suggested it was possible. The caches of stemmed points, the hearths that burned while ice sheets still dominated Canada, and the fragments of extinct horses stand as definitive evidence. When these maritime pioneers reached the rivers of Idaho 16,000 years ago, they didn't just pass through, they built fires. They buried their most valuable tools for future retrieval. They hunted Ice Age megafauna, and they found a place worth returning to, generation after generation.